Hey Michal, how you doing?
Hi, Tamir. How are you? I'm doing
Great,
great.
great, great meeting you. So happy to have you on the podcast for this episode.
Yeah.
And maybe let's start with introducing you to the people that are listening to us. So Michal is the founder and CEO of Lichi Translations. She graduated with a BA in Chinese Studies from the Department of Asian Studies in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Her studies included a summer semester in Taiwan and a year in Beijing University. At the start of her career, Michal accompanied Chinese delegations to Israel as a Hebrew, English, Chinese interpreter. She founded Lichi Translations in 1997 in Israel, and she incorporated the translation agency as a company in 2010. Since 2010, Michal has been a member of BNI, Business Network International, and she directs the Lichi Business Forum, which she established in the same year. And Michal is fluent in English, Chinese, Hebrew, and she also speaks French. She loves dogs and swimming. So, is that a good
Tamir, I
introduction?
think you said everything. Goodbye. No need to add anything else. Thanks. You're reminding me some history, my
Yeah,
studies and
yeah.
everything. Yes.
You go a long way back, I think.
Y-
And we met
Yes.
originally in 2017
Yes.
when in my previous company, Buena Vida, it was a relocation insurance agency for expats. And we needed a few translation projects. The first one was a medical documents translation for a customer so they can go on with their claim and successfully get reimbursed from their insurance company. And the second project was actually our go-to-market
Mhm.
translation. We had our website done in English, and we needed that translated into Hebrew. We first tried Google Translate. The
Oh
result
my
was
gosh. Yes.
horrific, and then
Especially back then. Now it's
yeah,
much better.
yeah. And then we realized we needed a professional translation agency, and we reached out to Michal, and Lichi delivered a seamless and well executed project for us that allowed us to go to market with our new website. I think we met in person in one of the events that you hosted
Yes.
in Israel about the Chinese market. Back then, I was very much immersed in the Chinese market and working with expats in Asia. And so, yeah, that's a short intro of how we go back. Not
Yes,
so many
thank
years,
you.
but we go
So
back.
at 2017, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, so great having you here. And I think maybe let's start by helping people learn more about you. And maybe you could start by speaking a bit about what motivated you to study Chinese in first place and how you got into this world.
First of all, thanks for the introduction, everything. I'm also excited to be here on this podcast episode. So I did start my career as a Chinese English Hebrew interpreter. I studied Chinese in Beijing University. Beijing University is like the Harvard of the Asia. And when you tell that to Chinese people, they say, oh, wow, they're really impressed. So that's a good thing to have on my resume. I also studied in the Hebrew University. Why Chinese? This was late 80s, 89 to 92. And as a young woman, I discovered that I love languages and I have talent for languages. It's always good to know what you're good at an early stage and pursue that as a profession. So then it helps you just do things you'll be good at and enjoy. And I started by studying French in Paris when I was 18. And I thought, wow, I picked it up pretty quickly. So when I finished the army and my big trip to Asia, I decided, okay, I'm going to study Chinese. It's special, it's different. Not many people study Chinese. I was intrigued by the opportunity to go and live in China. So, and stay there. And I knew if I wanted to study Chinese, it's not enough to do a degree in the Hebrew University in Israel. I'd have to be in China. And that's exactly what I did. Now, when I went to do that, I never thought about it as a business or company. It was just a passion and a talent that I thought, wow, this is going to be fascinating. And it really was. I was in Beijing University and I was studying the language, and it went well. And I got a scholarship for Beijing and for Taiwan. So I did that for a year. I even had a Chinese boyfriend there. So it was really fun because I got to practice the Chinese on a very high level.
You had a Chinese name also, right?
Yes, I
Lin
also had got a
Meisha.
Lin. Yeah, I also have a Chinese name. That happened when I was in Taiwan, and I met a Chinese family, and they said, "Okay, you have to have a Chinese name because Mikhal Heffer is hard to pronounce." So they gave me the name Meisha. Meisha is similar to Michal, and Lin was the family name of that family. So my Chinese name is Lin Meisha, which means a beautiful sunset in the forest.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that
Very,
name,
very
Lin Meisha.
poetic.
Yeah, it's very poetic and really beautiful. And so when I came back to Israel after my studies, it was it was pretty much just after Israel and China signed the diplomatic relationships between the two countries. So delegations started to stream into the country. Maybe once upon a time before they did it like silently, hidden, not spoken, but now in the early 90s, the Chinese delegations came and I was their interpreter. There weren't many Chinese speakers at the time in Israel, and it was wonderful. It was really
Nice.
an amazing experience. So I myself was the interpreter, and then they started to ask me, okay, so what about written translations? And I'm not good at writing Chinese. I gave up on it's really hard with all the characters and too much. That's definitely too hard for me. And I'm a verbal person, it's easier. So I expanded my team and I started to recruit people and recruit translators. Now, this was pre-internet, okay? So I had some students in the university that were living in Israel in the university, and they helped me with the translations. But then gradually, the internet came in, technology came in, and then gradually, for a couple of years, I was specializing in Chinese and Asian languages. And it was really helping companies that wanted to penetrate the Asian market to get all their marketing material, name cards, brochures, data sheets, all this material that's so important when you enter a new market because not everyone speaks English.
Yeah.
When you're working with American audience, so maybe everyone does speak English, but the world is not only English. So especially when you work with China, you have to have Chinese.
Yeah. Even in the US, not necessarily everybody speak English. If you go to Miami or Florida, like a lot of the population doesn't know a word of English and everything happens in Spanish. So there is
Oh,
definitely a mix, and there is definitely a case for using the local language wherever you go. And this is how you started Lichi Translations, right? And you had the logo like a Chinese sign
yes,
from
Chinese
top to
logo.
bottom.
Right.
And yeah, so Lichi came to be because of your hobby, because you enjoy.
Because of my passion for language and Chinese. And by the way, the name lychee is a fruit. Some say lychee, and it's an Asian fruit. So if there's orange and apple, why shouldn't there be lychee? So that's why I chose this the
Nice.
name for Asian languages. But then
Yeah.
the company expanded and we moved on and expanded to just duplicated the services I offered in Chinese and Asian languages, which was written translation and interpretation into all the other languages. And today, Lichi Translations offer multilingual translation services in all languages, any language, and to any language, which basically brings me back to what we worked on together, which was mainly Hebrew English for
Yeah.
for your clients.
And so, can you tell us maybe a bit more? Because I think that's very interesting. In 2010, you had a change in direction and you said, okay, I'm going to start working with the whole world and not just focus on the Asian market. Maybe you can tell us more why that happened and why you decided to expand the company into other markets.
Yeah, first of all, I always expanded organically according to the requests I received from my clients. So if a client asks for Chinese, so maybe in the beginning they asked for Hebrew English, I said, no, I don't do that. No, 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 I don't do that. Things change, and why not expand and become much bigger? And basically, I have the capacity to do any other languages. Yeah, even after 2010, I would say 2015 was more of the changing point that I decided to go really multilingual. Just why not?
Yeah.
And
But
also, it was suddenly wasn't enough. And my company grew. I had more employees. I had project managers. At first, I did everything on my own, but then project managers came in. So a client that reaches us, they get an A to Z solution, someone that helps them and talks to them about all the steps of the translation process and all the options that are available.
so it was really just taking the services you had for Asia and just modifying the translator in the end. But the whole
Yes,
process for your company stays same. And you're
yes,
like, why am I just doing it for Asia? Why am I not looking at other markets
yes, exactly. Yeah.
as well? And so I think that happens a lot when you can just take the service and maybe repackage it and serve it to a different uh, audience. And I think what came with that was the branding upgrade that you did. You got rid of the Chinese logo and you changed it
Yes.
into a more global kind of logo. We can see it right now, I think,
Yeah,
on
and if you can
our
see it
screen.
on my logo in the back. So what's important in what do I do? Okay. I make a connection. I mean, so many people are working in an international market and they don't know a language. So we are a bridge for one person to another because basically it's people to people, companies to company, one language to another. And so you see the logo goes dot 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 from one location to another. That's what we do anywhere. So we basically our mission is to help companies flourish and succeed in markets that they do not speak the language, because that can be a very difficult barrier. It's definitely difficult in China because not so many people speak Chinese, definitely not back then. Now maybe it's a bit different, but many countries people don't speak English and you need a way of connecting.
Yeah. And I think if you start looking at English, because for Chinese it's very clear that you need a translation agency, and a lot of the times you probably can't even check them and see what they've done because you don't read Chinese. But for English, I think a lot of companies have this notion that they don't really need a translator. They know English, so they would just take their text and change it into English. And a lot of the times, what is text that looks like it looks
Translated.
like, yeah, it's fragmented and it's very clear that it was translated word by word instead of having the text translated as a whole, the messaging translated.
I
And
think
I
that's a
tried.
major, yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
that's a major issue in translation. It can't be a word to word translation. It needs to be fluent, it needs to be smooth, it needs to be written as the translation should give you the feeling that it was written in your own language
Exactly.
and not translated.
And I remember when I did that for the current company I work in, we had a landing page in Hebrew, and we wanted to translate that landing page into English. And I translated that, and it was fine, but it felt like it was written by someone that didn't have too much experience writing marketing copy in English, for example. And so I started working with a copywriter, and I told him, look, that it looks fine, but it's 80% or 70% fine. And a lot of the times you want it, especially if that's your landing page, that's where you're sending
It needs to
people
sparkle.
to, yeah, it needs to, like, you need to hit the home run on the first try. And if you're doing it by yourself, then a lot of the times it's going to be somewhat okay or somewhat not so bad, but it's not going to be the right copy to make people make people go to take
Call,
action
yeah, call to
and
action. It has to be really good. That's true.
exactly and act on your text. So I think from my perspective, I learned that you really need to pay like attention, not only to translating, but also translating the text, obviously, but also to the feeling or the tone of the messaging or the brand or exactly the type of message that you want to convey, because different messages can come through differently in each language. And I guess the question for you is maybe if you can talk about how first what's the importance from your perspective of keeping, or let's say keeping the messaging with the right tone and feeling for the language, and then how do you do that? How do you make sure that when you're translating, you're not only translating the language, but you're also translating with the right feeling and tone?
Tamir, maybe just a minute before we do that, can you introduce for the audience, for the listeners, introduce your connection to the US and what you do?
Yeah.
Because I know you're very much involved in America. I know that you spent like 3 or 4 months in a mini relocation there to go and check out the market and see what kind of services you can do. And I know you're doing software,
Yeah.
Zendex, I think, and Zapier, whatever.
I'm Tamir. One of the companies I founded is Adelante. We're a CRM implementation agency. I've been working in Israel with this company for let's say, for 3 years. And then last year, I realized that the Israeli market is a bit too small for what I'm trying to achieve. And I wanted to grow the company a bit more. And I said, okay, I can either expand to other CRM platforms, or I could expand to a different geographical market. And really the most attractive market for me was the US, because A, that's where most businesses are, and B, for me, the US represented a very interesting cultural, let's say, I want to study about the culture of the US. I wanted to learn more about how businesses work in the US and what makes America tick. And I wanted to try and live in the US for a few months. So I packed myself and my girlfriend.
And your girlfriend, yes.
And we
You
went
took an
over
Airbnb somewhere.
to the Airbnbs of New York and Austin. And we spent a
Wonderful.
couple of months in New York, a couple of
And
months.
you got clients from that, right?
Yes.
You really created contacts. I think that's amazing, the way in 4 months you go and you build a business, an entrepreneur that builds your own business in probably in a market that has a few other players that
Yeah.
offering the Zendex support. I think that's quite amazing.
And I think and connecting with your previous point, one of your previous points, one of the things that got me motivated on doing that is I was looking at one of the platforms we are using for building automations, and I saw how many partners they have in Israel, and I think they had 100 in Israel for that small country, for 10 million people total in Israel. And then in the US, they had 120 or something like that for
Crazy.
300 million.
So there's an enormous potential.
So there are more partners, like, raw numbers, but obviously the potential in the US, if you look at it at this per population and as part of the economic activities, is much bigger, and it's much bigger in the US than in Israel. And then
of course
that also built on top of my interests in languages and cultures. And so I said, okay, let's do that, and
And
let's
obviously you have to have material in English
yeah,
because, and it has to be very good, high class material. And that brings me to the original question is you need to adapt the material to your local market. So
exactly,
you said you took a copywriter, which is an amazing solution. You take an American copywriter to brush up your own English, to improve it, to update it, to rephrase whatever is necessary. And that's an important part of the localization process because let's say you'd go to England or you go to the US. So you might want a few different types of words, right? You
exactly,
wouldn't want only, you'd want American words and not British words
exactly.
for that.
And
And
I think one of the concepts we really incorporated in the landing page in English is using phrases in, let's say, American English. So we didn't say, we called our, let's say, a process, we called it a framework. We said we have a game plan for this, for moving forward with the project. So all of those are nuances, but they build up and they make the audience understand that you're speaking their language and you're one of
it's very
them,
important.
and while we're still conserving the initial, let's say, feeling or the message that we wanted to convey, which is we'll do this CRM implementation for you really fast and precisely how you need it done. So but then in American English there is a different way to say precisely how you need it than there is in Hebrew. And I can recall that in Israel, when one of the landing pages variations or messaging variations that we tested was saying something from very like military concept. You have, let's say, one bullet in your magazine and you need to like hit it right the first time, but that concept doesn't resonate in American English, so we changed it. So it really, I think it's maybe important to elaborate on that, because this concept is first, it drives away everyone that doesn't have military experience, especially women leaders and managers that sometimes are very, let's say, repelled by violent or aggressive
Military aspect.
perspectives or
Okay.
phrases. And it doesn't resonate with most of the Americans, since most of the Americans don't have military experience, while a lot of the Israelis do have military
Yes.
experience. They know what it's like when you're in a shooting range and you need to hit with the last bullet you have, because this is what they went through in the army. Almost everybody,
Yes.
even the girls that go on to be office managers afterwards, they go on a shooting range in Israel. So in Israel, it's a very common experience, while in the US, almost nobody did that. So we had to translate that messaging into a more positive speaking and maybe more broader, a message that has a broader understanding. And so I think
You
that's
really have to localize your material so it's suitable for your local market as far as language, but also your target market as far as the sector you're working in.
exactly. So if I wanted to work with, I know, corporate America, I can't go on with a shooting
Military.
range
Yes,
analogy.
you might. It might be interesting to see how they find it, but I
Yeah,
guess you don't want to take your chances about it.
yeah.
But I
And
think when
until,
we yeah,
no, sorry, go ahead.
when we translate, I'm not sure we can take the liberty in making such big differences for the client. It's a bit of we usually wouldn't. There's translation and copywriting. So when you change the message, it's already you moved into copywriting, okay?
Yeah,
Because you're already changing the way you're saying things and you're changing, it's not only the words. When we do translation, we might use the same kind of images, because you gave a very good example with the shooting. Military ideas work in English. This might need to be an extra editing stage, copywriting stage, because then we might have an occasion that they say, oh, the client really loved this phrasing and this idea. And hey, you changed everything. Do I have the liberty to change so much as a translator? You as a client have.
Yeah.
You say, okay,
And
I like this message, but I don't want it to be military. And you can tell me, use a different kind of wording for this.
yeah. And I guess a translator or a good translator would flag that and say, hey, this might not resonate with the audience. Do you want to like have another look at that? Because if you're working, and I think Lichi only works with translators that they're native, they're translating
Exactly.
into their native language.
Native,
So,
yes, it's very
so
important. A native person that grew up in America, the US, that really knows the ins and out of the language, they would know intuitively what can be used and cannot be used in the other language. So basically, when we translate into different languages, we'd always use a native speaker. So this cuts down the risks of making like intercultural mistakes, something
so
that
how do they? What's their work process like? What are they doing to make sure they are translating the right message, but and maintain their original intent and style and the context, but they still adjust it for the market and
I think adjustments would be in issues that are very important, such as like when in the localization process, if we take a system or software or website. So obviously, if it's from Hebrew to English, so we change the currency, we change the metric into inches, feet, whatever is used in the target market. We changed the names. I can give you an example. We had once a diamond company that wrote little stories about engagement stories in the diamond, in the ring industry. So they told about David and Miriam, and Rachel, and these names. So like this couple that got married and David married Rachel, etc. So we could have used David and Rachel. That also would have been good, but I think we chose John and Mary, which might have been a more local name. And definitely we did also a Chinese version, so we changed the story. So it's not maybe located in Tel Aviv, it would be located in Beijing, and it would be Wang and Zhang that are the heroines, the heroes of this little stories that appeared in the website. So this is a type of adaptation that we discussed this with the client. Do you want to, obviously you don't want to, we'd ask the client, do you want to maintain the Hebrew names? Do you want it to be uh, uh, to have a sense of feel of the local country? And that's also true if you do English into other languages or Hebrew into languages. Do you want to maintain the local ambiance of the original language, or you want to have it fully localized into a foreign language? It depends on the client, because someone, if you have a strong American brand or a strong British or a strong French brand, you want to maintain it, okay?
yeah.
Let's say we worked with Van Cleef and Arpels. This is a very known French diamond company. So in their material, they want everyone to know it's from Paris
Yeah.
and it's French. But then we have another diamond company that I won't mention their name. They do jewelry, and they didn't want to have anything to do with Israel. And they had they opened a website for each and every target market they have. So we did 16 languages at the time. So they had a website in German and a website in Dutch and a website in Finnish and in Italian and in Spanish and in English and in each country they had their own material, but we did translate from English into different languages, but they put it on different websites with a local look and feel.
Yeah. That's hyper localization, but I guess sometimes that makes sense. I guess both from a technical SEO perspective, and also really if you're trying to speak about something cultural and something that's emotional, like diamonds or engagement rings, then you probably want to speak in the way people express their emotions in that country, and it could be very different, obviously between countries, but also within a certain country. In China, you have different dialects.
I think it's important also in the industries because there's different, the matter of terminology is very important. You ask, how do we make sure that we translate accurately? There's the grammar and the style, but there's also the terminology you use. So often clients would give us a glossary. Let's say, would you translate car or vehicle, airplane, aircraft, plane? So you can use different words for the same thing. Many times, as I said, the client will give us the glossary. So we know that we are using the right terminology for the industry. It's important in technical translations, medical translations.
Mhm.
But sometimes we would create the glossary and the terms and review them together with the client to make sure that, let's say, their local agent, having a local agent for, if a client has a local agent that gives feedbacks, that's perfect. Or someone local that can give us the feedback as we work on the translation. Because I always need to remember that client usually knows the best. They live the ins and outs of an industry and the country, and they know their industry best, better than the translator. The translator knows a lot and they do their best, but they don't live the specific industry. So having a collaboration between the client and the translator is always very important. And sometimes we would offer the terms and we'd go backwards and forwards with the translator, with the client, to get feedback about the terms, if this is what they want to use, or they'd like to use something different.
Nice. And so let's maybe to wrap up the translation part, maybe we can speak a bit about AI in translation and how is it impacting you right now? What are the changes that you're seeing in the translation industry with the emergence of new AI tools?
So first of all, we are in the midst of a revolution. We feel it in other aspects, but in the translation industry, it's a revolution. It's changing the way the translation business is looking and operating, and it's changing the role of the translator. Now, a human translator will always have a role in this industry, translating poetry, maybe prose, but more and more we are using and implementing tools of AI, machine translation. It depends on the language pairs, it depends on the industry, but quite often it gives a result that's not bad. Nowadays, it's getting better day by day. Every 6 months, it's an enormous upgrade. So we offer our clients the use of AI. And what is the role of the translator for these projects is to edit and review and correct and make sure there are no stupid mistakes left in, because AI doesn't know everything and we don't have to have any embarrassing mistakes in the text. And so you have to, let's say I have an example for, let's say, in Hebrew, you'd say machon re'ot, which is lung department of a hospital. But re'ot, you can also read as re'ut, and re'ut is a name. But if you say the re'ut department, that's wrong.
Yeah.
It has to be the lung, and you can also do it re'ut, which is vision. So you have to, it's tricky. You read, the AI doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
And David could be translated as Dud, which is like a heater, or David as a name, or Dod as an uncle. So this happens in many languages. So you really have to know the context. And AI doesn't know everything, but you really have to review it really well and edit and make it smooth, and you have to perfect it. And that's, but not using AI is not an option these days, because it gives us great benefit both for us and the client. It reduces the time a translator works on the translation and reduces costs.
So it
Time is
really
money.
creates like a good first draft for you and I guess for the translator to work with. It's like an intern that's very fast.
Yes,
And like,
definitely into English. Okay, so as you're working with American markets, and let's say Israeli companies working in America would need their English draft like you did. So it's a very good English material. It's a very good draft, but you have to edit it. I occasionally have clients that agree only for AI because they just want to know need a brief understanding of what it's all about. So then it only the AI can be good enough. Now, AI is not good when you have scanned materials, like scanned documents, because the scanning is not so good. You need a good, best if you have an open file, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc.
Nice. Cool. So let's maybe speak about a bit more about it. Let's make it this a bit of a fun conversation. Maybe we can speak about some translation, humor, or nuances that you ran into in your 20 something years of doing translations. You have a few interesting articles on your blogs
Yes.
about words that can't really be translated. Do you want to share some examples from there?
Yeah, because each language has their own words. And even let's say you take a word that everybody knows, bon appetit. How would you translate? Now, everyone knows that, so that's quite useful. But how would you translate that into English? Enjoy your meal. It's not the same as bon appetit, which has the blessing of having a good dinner.
Yeah.
So this is something everyone knows. Maybe there's some other little examples. Komorebi, komorebi in Japanese, which is a single word meaning the sunlight streaming through the leaves of the tree.
Yeah, I
Isn't
guess
that
Japanese
beautiful?
have quite a few words that you can't really translate word to word into another language.
Yes. And let's say Arpok, I'm not sure how you really even pronounce it. This is in Inuit, the language of the Eskimos. And this is only a word that you can have for Eskimos, the feeling of expectation that leads one to peep out of an igloo to see if anyone is coming.
Yeah, you definitely
So
can
yeah,
translate this one.
yes. So let's just give another one.
I think also in
Pano,
Hebrew we have the fargen,
yes,
and
tachles, yes, you have words.
which means to say, to give good feedback, to give like a compliment, but there isn't like a translation for that in English to the actual meaning of that. It's very local to Israel, even I guess within people that speak Hebrew outside of Israel, it's still not as common as in people that live in Israel.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe, and so now here, so what does a translator do? Okay. How do they translate that? So you need to be very rich with your words and use a more imaginative way and use other words to express the same meaning because let's say you the word is important and the meaning is important, so you go bypass it with other words that and maintain the
yeah,
original meaning.
yeah, you need to be creative.
Yeah. And maybe we can also talk about another example because there's some words that you can't express, but there's also gestures. Now, part of what a part of what we do is important part of the translation industry is interpretation. We didn't really speak about that, but we have interpretation projects, which means you have a meeting, you have a conference, you have something really important that you have a discussion with people, and then you need an interpreter in the room to translate between the different parties. And an interpreter, I want to give you an example of this movie I saw. Tarantino has a very famous movie called Inglorious Bastards. It's a story about a unit of Jewish American soldiers during World War II, and they specialized in eliminating Nazis. Suddenly, there's a scene that it's as if was written like an instruction guidebook for interpreters, and it shows the Gestapo officer how a Gestapo officer exposes a British agent that is this British agent was disguised to be a German officer simply because he didn't order 3 glasses of whiskeys in the proper German way. So he says, yes, I would like to order 3 glasses of whiskey. Now, any German would know that this is how you order
right gesture.
3. Yeah, this is the right gesture. Okay. So this is someone only that was born in Germany, raised in Germany. I didn't know that. Nobody knows that. Okay. So this is what cost him his life, because as Tarantino, it's very bloody and there was a big shooting stuff, and that was the end of that scene. So you have to be really careful about different things, but obviously an interpreter won't get shot by making such a mistake at Lichi Translations, but the people are more forgiving nowadays.
But it is worth maybe saying like a few words about interpretation, because I think it's a very interesting profession. You get to be in the room with all the leaders. For example, in politics, if you're interpreting between political leaders, then you could have a meeting between the heads of 2 governments, and it will be only the 2 of them and the 2 translators or interpreters.
It's very important. I was an interpreter. I loved it. Tamir, it's like to be the star of the room. Everyone is waiting to hear what I say. And I was sitting in business delegations coming from China, and we were talking. They were signing a joint venture agreement between an Israeli company and a Chinese company. And everything went through me. You know what powerful position this is, to be the pipeline for the communication. So you have to be quite accurate. You have to be accurate. You have to be fast. You have to concentrate. You can't just stop. Let's say if I translate a document, I can say, okay, I'm going to have a cup of coffee. I'll be back in an hour and continue the translation. Here it has to be snap, snap. You have to be quick. If you're at loss of words, suddenly I have a blackout and I don't know the word, I have to try, okay, let's go around it and find a different way of translating. Sometimes I get help from the audience if someone knows, oh, this is the word. The terminology has to be clear. I usually work with, I have my terminology table in front of me. Now, listen, for me also, Chinese is not my native language. I'm missing a lot of words. I could always get around, but I'm still missing words. But I always improvised and went and did. So I managed to get the message through, and it was. And this company, they signed a joint venture at the end of the process. So that was really nice to be part of.
The interpretation worked.
Yes. Now I'll tell you a funny thing is once I went out, I took a break and I went out to the toilet. And when I came back, I discovered that one of the girls was really good at English. The Chinese girls there was really good at English, and she even took my spot for a while. And so there's always a replacement. Interpreters don't go out of the toilet. Make sure you have full control over your seat. And
I think I read in one of your blog posts that Chinese, a lot of them know very good English, but they feel they need to be very precise in what they're saying. So they are always preferring to speak in Chinese regardless of how good they know English.
Yes, there's also the issue of loose face is a term that's very important in the Chinese culture. They don't want to be embarrassed in public, Asians. They don't want to be embarrassed. It's not like we Israelis, we don't care, we make mistakes. Oh, and we could even say we don't care so much. We have more of a nerve, a chutzpah. We'd say anything we want, just blabber it out. But Asians are more reserved and more. You have to make sure they don't want to be lose face. They don't want to be embarrassed in public. So even if they know English very well, they understand everything, they might not want to face the embarrassment of making some kind of mistake.
Yeah. Cool. Maybe last question here. Did you have any experience where something was lost in the translation and it led to any unexpected or funny results?
I've had let's say I did have a project that we were translating a book for a client. And then now, apparently, in the beginning of the process, she spoke with a translator, and she said, "It's very important for me that you keep the translation word to word exactly the way I wrote it." And she was very particular about the way she wanted the translation. But then when she got the translation, she said, "Hey, this doesn't sound good. It's word to word." So we had to go back and review it because the translator did use some terms that were not like to grin from ear to ear. In Hebrew, it works. I think in English it works, but in French it doesn't work. So you have to change the wording, and she did it too much word to word.
Yeah.
So she had to go back and review everything and change it.
Okay, and maybe as we're coming to a close, maybe let's try and wrap up with some actionable advice. So first, what advice would you give to companies looking to expand into the US or maybe other international markets in terms of translation?
So I would first say is yes, you definitely need to have your material prepared in the target language. I would say choose a native speaker to as a translator for your material. Don't use someone that happened to learn some Chinese or someone that knows a little bit of English. It really needs to be someone that speaks the language at a mother tongue level. It should be someone that has a talent for writing and is experienced translator. I would also suggest that you ask for some sample because when you have a sample, you see the result before you have the whole translation performed. So take a look at it before, ask for some reviews from some other people because the translator is human. The translator does their best, but it's not always suitable for you. And you can also ask an agency for a few samples so that you can choose. As they ask 2 or 3 samples from different translators, then you can test the style and the fluency, and if you like the translation or not. And I
Nice.
also have some, I'd like also to give some networking tips
Yeah, yeah.
because, okay, oh, that was your next
Just
question.
get in next
Okay,
next thing.
so basically, listen, you did an amazing job. You went to the US and you created your meetings and you got clients. This is wonderful. I'd like to add another option for people wanting to work in the international market. I've been a BNI member for over 14 years. BNI is an international networking organization that works according to word of mouth referrals, which is you join a group and a chapter, they get to know you, and they refer other clients to you. Now, as it's an international organization, I would suggest you travel to the US. You want to open up a new business, go to visit a chapter. You'd also find you can find chapters through bni.com, and you can also find members there. So go visit the chapter, introduce yourself, tell the chapter members what connections you're looking for. So let's say you're looking for high-tech companies that use Zendex, go to a chapter and say that's what you're looking for. Do you know any large companies worth, I don't know, 550, 500 employees and above that have a help desk that offer the support? These are great connections for me. Now, another thing that's important in networking is if you're opening a new market, you need service providers. So instead of going to Google and asking for a website developer, a photographer, event planner, you can find great people on BNI. Why is BNI people better than the internet? Because they've been screened already. They've been, as a member of an organization, you won't stay there very long if you're not good. If there's complaints about your service, you'll be kicked out. So there's a little story that I've heard. No, there's a reality, the race. In Hebrew, it's a Merotz Million, the race. And there was an episode in one of the cities somewhere, and one of the participants in the race was a BNI member. And they did the whole task. They achieved everything through making connections to a local BNI chapter. They got everything arranged, and it helped them, I don't know, win.
The Amazing Race, that's how
The
it's called.
Amazing Race, how it's called. Yes,
Amazing Race.
the Amazing Race.
And that's a very valid, that's a very useful note we spoke about in previous episodes on how you get the right people, and I've been personally using freelance platforms like Upwork and Fiverr, but obviously for some stuff or some types of jobs, it would be easier to maybe screen and find the right person through some in-person knowledge, like meeting them in person or getting recommendations from other people to that person. So I think that's a very good mentioning that you find BNI on bni.com,
.com.
right?
You can find a chapter there. And if you're going to, I know wherever you go, you can check if there's a chapter, but you can also contact them through the email. You can look at the members of the chapter and you can just write to them and schedule a one-to-one, a meeting with them on Zoom or phone or once you arrive. And many of them, I'm sure they'd be very happy to meet you or anybody that needs their services. Why not?
Nice. Do you have any maybe tips and tricks from networking? You've been doing that for almost 15 years. And what's your personal, let's say, tips
Networking
for
tip.
someone that wants to start networking and expand and build their network?
So go to networking events is very good. Exchange your details with people. I know you like many or few, whatever you're looking for, and follow up. That's really important
How do you
wherever you
keep in
go.
touch?
Yes,
How do you
I
follow
take
up?
all the information, I put it all into an Excel sheet, I send them an email, I follow up on the by phone to the ones that are according to importance, because you can't follow up everybody. It's crazy,
Yeah.
but you do send a follow-up email. And if there's someone that's particularly interesting, I'd give them a call. Now, it doesn't have to be me that would do it. I could ask my team, my sales manager, to say, okay, listen, I met this person. It could be in a networking event, it could be in a conference, a workshop. I spoke to her. She said that she might need translation work. Why don't you give her a call, see what it's all about, and
Hmm.
if we can take it a step forward? And just talk about what you do anywhere you go. You never know who's going to be a good client for you. It could be in we mentioned swimming, it could be your swimming partner, it could be your dance partner, it could be a partner you go on a hiking with, it could be your neighbors, it could be your family members you're having dinner with on holidays, Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever. You never know. But
Right.
but just speak out to anybody, because it could be really anybody. I got business anywhere, everywhere I went, just talking to people.
Great. Any last words? Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I had a great time. Okay.
Thank you. Me too.
I think I'm happy to be on this podcast with you. I really hope it's beneficial for people. You're welcome to ask me more questions and any other, my details, you probably have them. And I hope I'm going to introduce you to as well to my clients, because it's networking is vice versa.
Yeah.
So
Great. So if you want to reach out to Michal, it's lichitranslations.com, and, and that's a website. And thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure, and have a great day.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.